Hello, my friends. I'm Joel. This is Summit. Welcome to Ordinary Time. Do you feel ordinary? Hey, this isn't about mediocrity. This is about greatness. Greatness in ordinary time, a time where we get back into the ebb and flow of church life, and we recognize that God is present with us in the ordinary everyday moments. But the ordinary everyday moments, well, they can get transformed pretty radically because we never know who is going to show up. That's what this week is all about, the unexpected intrusion of the Lord into our lives. I don't know how I always feel about that, if I'm being honest with you, because I am not an overly cautious person, but I like to weigh my options, and I always like to leave my options open, especially if it means the option to go back. If I struggled with anything in my life, it's looking backwards. Because sometimes I get into that mode where I enter into something new, and I find myself kind of looking over my shoulder and saying, oh man, I remember how things used to be. Anytime we enter into new beginnings, honestly, I think that's a temptation for all of us, right? You go into a new year of school, you go away to college, you enter a new job, you start a new sport, you move to a new city. And these new beginnings always present this temptation to look backwards at where we were and compare the past to the present. But we all have experienced a real issue with this, right? Because when we do that, we aren't as present to the moment in which we are in as we should be. We end up looking backwards and we don't take a hold of the new things that are happening. We don't really enter in. And Jesus confronts this reality this week in the gospel, and we get a real actionable way of how to live it out in the first reading. Let's start with the gospel. We've got this account of Jesus having people come to him and ask him to follow. And this makes sense. Jesus is an itinerant teacher. He's a rabbi. People want to follow him. And he's doing some pretty cool stuff. Like, who doesn't want to follow around this guy who's got these really kind of cool teachings, but also is healing people and casting out demons? That's pretty spectacular. And so people are coming up to him and saying, hey, let me follow you. And Jesus welcomes them to follow him. But then they qualify it with an out, a little bit of caution. One person says, well, let me go back and bury my parents, which Jesus is like, hey, let the dead bury the dead, which seems kind of cruel. Like, hey, let me go attend my dad's funeral. But what's being asked here is not let me go attend the immediacy of the funeral. Like, hey, once I'm done taking care of my parents and they die, then I'll come follow you. Another person asks to follow Jesus, and Jesus just reminds him, there are places that animals live. Foxes have dens, and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And if you follow me, you're going to have to trust in God's providence. There's not going to be a set place for you. You're going to have to really lean in to the new things that God is doing as he provides. And not everybody's able to do this. People want the out. How do you respond when God unexpectedly breaks into your life and calls you towards something? When you know it, when it's definite, when Jesus is saying, I'm calling you to follow me in this way. And sometimes that happens in big moments, and sometimes that happens in little moments. There are little moments where God calls us to do the right thing, to choose to act as Christ would act, to love our neighbor, to love ourselves, to choose prayer and to love God. There are moments that God calls us like that. It's not always these big moments, but we have an opportunity to lean in or to say, well, I'll get to that in a little bit. Have you ever just been sitting around and had the sudden desire or thought, maybe I should spend some time in prayer. I should pick up my Bible. I should read a little bit of scripture. And then you think, oh no, I'll get to that later. See, that's a moment. That's an unexpected intrusion of God into your life, calling you to something deeper. Then, of course, there's bigger moments. Moments where we feel like I've got to make suddenly a big life decision, that God's calling me towards something that's going to be a big change. But we hesitate. Here's where the first reading gives us a real actionable way of how we respond to God's call. There's this great prophet, Elijah, and he needs to pick somebody as his successor. So he finds this person who, maybe it's because the name is similar, maybe it's just because he was there, but this guy named Elisha, who is plowing. He's a farmer. And Elijah throws his cloak over him, which is a sign of calling. It's like, hey, I'm picking you to be my disciple. And not just my disciple, but my successor. And Elisha says, hey, I've got to do something quick. Let me go back and tell my parents goodbye. It sounds a little bit like what Jesus would have rebuked people for, right? But this is what Elisha goes and does. He goes back and he breaks down all of his plowing equipment. He butchers his oxen and uses the meat to feed the town. He burns his plowing equipment. There's no going back. Elisha goes back to make sure that there are no loose ends, nothing that would make him look back over his shoulder and want to go back home. He's all in. And for us this week, that's the call. Can you be all in on God's call in your life? In the little ways and in the big ways. It's not always going to mean some crazy change, but it might mean changing some behavior today. It might mean taking the more difficult route today. It might mean choosing prayer today. Even though we're in ordinary time, there are going to be these unexpected intrusions of God into your life. And we don't have all these set benchmarks like we do in Lent and in Easter and in Advent for them. But God still works, and God is still calling you. And that allows this time to be incredibly powerful because God's calling us to something great, even in the ordinary. And I know for some of you, summertime means some summer trips, conferences, retreats, camps. Let me know where you're going this summer in the comment section. If you're going to any of these summer youth conferences, what are you doing to build up your faith this summer? You going anywhere cool for that? Let me know in the comment section below. And if I'm going to see you at an event, I'll let you know, and maybe we can get together and say hello, talk about the readings. And if not, you know what? I'm going to see you back here next week for the 14th Sunday of Ordinary Time on Summit.